What's up, guys? Evan Jarvis here, also known as Gripst. And today, I'm going to give you my complete strategy guide for Heroes of Holdem. Heroes of Holdem is a brand new game that I've been playing for the last 90 days or so. And it's a game where poker meets fantasy and magic cards and magic happens. The game's just honestly amazing. I love the game so much that I made a massive strategy guide, which I'm going to be sharing with you today, including all my secrets and best strategies for success and results in Heroes of Holdem. So if this is a game that looks interesting to you, something you might want to try out, you can greatly increase your chances of winning early and winning often by following the advice in this guide. Let's go ahead and get into it. So Heroes of Holdem, my winning secrets for success. Let's rock and roll. So first, if you haven't played Heroes of Holdem before, if it's your first time hearing about the game or whatever, I'm just going to give a very quick overview of how to play Heroes of Holdem, where fantasy and poker meet. So the first thing you do once you get to the lobby, which you can see with the Helm's Deep stack section here, is you choose the event that you want to play. It's a poker-based game, so there are MTTs, which is Helm's Deep stack in this example, and sit and goes. There are 6-player sit and goes, 4-player sit and goes with 2 bot characters, or 2-player sit and goes with 4 bot characters. So you choose your game. Then secondly, you would choose your hero. In the bottom, I have an example of one of my heroes, my human druid stacked character known as Heavy D's, who has 8 abilities, 6 equipments, and 6 minion points. And this is just one of a few heroes I have. So you choose your hero. You can either do a pre-made character, which there are 7 of, 1 for each class, which we'll cover as we get through the presentation. Or you can have a custom character if you're more into the game and hardcore like I am. Next, once you've picked your character and enough players have registered for a game to start, you play poker like normal. It's basically like playing a turbo or a hyper turbo tournament. And you play down until you get to the money, until someone has all the chips. Now, the one extra element, well, actually there are 2 extra elements, but one of the main extra elements in the game is that after each round of betting, there is an abilities phase. And you can use some of the abilities that you have to do different things in the game, which I'll cover as we get through the presentation. And the other element is that there are also minions that join you in the tournament that you play. And when they win pots, they give you some of their chips, they give you some of their health. So you kind of go into the game with a team of characters, which is pretty fun. So as the game plays, you play poker, you use your abilities, cast spells. Your goal is to make the payout structure, which I have an example of on the top right. And your goal is to finish as high as possible, get as much prize tokens as you can, and increase your rating as much as possible. If you finish outside of the money in a tournament, you will lose some points on your rank and you will not get any hero tokens. But if you cash a tournament, you will get a boost to your rank. And the higher you finish, the higher that boost will be. And the same goes for your prize. So that's the very basics of Heroes of Holdem, just so you have a general understanding. But in this video, we really want to cover how to smash it, how to crush it, how to win, and get more cashes and get more wins, because poker is more fun when you win. Heroes of Holdem is more fun when you win. And I, as your teacher, want to help you win. So the topics of interest in today's presentation will be the best time to use your abilities and spells, how to play versus the NPCs, non-player characters, and minions, keys for success in short stack play, because the tournaments are fairly high speed. It's a lot of shallow stack play, so it's important to know how to play a short stack well. Some things to consider when playing the bubble, and how to think about cashing versus playing for the win. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about heads up strategy to help you seal the deal and get those first place finishes. And finally, I'm going to cover how to get extra lives or second chances in the tournaments. Because that's one of the fun things about Heroes of Holdem, is that with the equipment and the abilities and the spells, you can stay in the game a little bit longer. You will notice that there's nothing on the topic list here of how to play poker. That's because I already have hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel on how to do that. If you want more info on that, just go to youtube.com/Gripst and watch the videos on how to win at poker. Everything you need, you can find there for free. So let's get into the Heroes of Holdem specific teachings and specific strategies so you can have the best chance of success when playing Heroes of Holdem. First, we're going to cover the best times to use your abilities and spells. Your abilities are spells. It's just they're called abilities in game, but I think of them as spells because most of them are pretty magical. Now, the basic rules when it comes to using your abilities are that there are 5 stages of the game. There is the early, mid, late, bubble, and end game, and sometimes the bubble kind of overlaps. So in the early game, when stacks are deeper, blinds are smaller, and average stack is maybe 20, 25, 30 blinds, because it's never super deep, you want to see cheap flops to get the opportunity to cast your spells. To cast your pre-flop spells, you need to finish betting pre-flop. To cast your flop spells, you need to finish betting on the flop, and so on and so forth. So you want to see flops cheaply and cast spells or use abilities that buff your characters, that means strengthen them, or maybe steal minions from other characters. And I will give examples of all the different types of abilities on the following slides. In the mid game, you want to use abilities as needed to survive or win big pots. There's some abilities that let you manipulate the board. There are some abilities that let you regain health. And you're going to want to use these in the mid game to ensure that you win your big confrontations when you get into them and actually have the opportunity to make it to the end game. Because, well, in a perfect world, you'd have all your abilities to use in the end game. If you don't make it past the mid game, doesn't matter what you've saved. In the late game, we want to use debuff damage spells. Example of this are poison and hex and burning and bleeding, and we'll talk about those more on a future slide. But these are basically spells that drain your opponent's health or chip away at their chip stack hand by hand without you actually having to do anything beyond casting the spell. Then on the bubble, you'll want to use spells like Shelter and spells that give you free chips. These are things like free straddles, raise the blind 300%. And Shelter is something really cool because it allows you to sit out and not have to post any blinds or antes during the time that you're sitting out, and also heal 5% of the average health per hand that you're sitting out. So that's a super, super, super bubble tactic. And anyone who's been short stack on a bubble before, hoping that they can squeak into the money, can imagine how cool it would be to have an ability that lets them stay in the game, but not have to post those blinds or antes. And finally, in the end game, you use whatever you have left. Now, one thing I want to mention about the abilities is you only get to use each ability once per tournament, once per event, unless you have some special spells that let you get some of them back, which we will cover. But the reason you need to be selective when you use them is because you only get to use each one once for the most part. Let's look at some examples. So first, looking at buffing ability examples. So Hallowed Halls. For the next 12 hands, you and your minions win an additional 50% health from pots won. That means if you win a pot for 1,000 chips, you'd get an extra 500 as a bonus. If your minion wins a pot for 2,000 chips, they would get an extra 1,000 chips as a bonus. So you've buffed your hero or your minions and you've given them a bonus, a booster. Virtue is another example of one that gives your minions double the rewards for the pots won. Now, I think this has been adjusted because they thought it was too strong, so it's now 50%. We just hadn't updated the text. But again, your minions would get extra chips from pots they won. That's just one of the examples of a buff. Other buffs can be that, for example, if someone loses to one of your minions, they get a debuff or a penalty. So these are the things you want to cast early so that while your minions are in play, because they're not the best poker players, the pots they win can be bigger, more enhanced, give you a bonus, or do extra damage to opponents. So you want to see flops cheaply to be able to cast these spells, and you generally cast them early. Some examples of minion stealing abilities are Charm, gain control of target non-dragon minion with less health than you for the remainder of the event, or Domestication, gain control of target non-dragon minion with less health than you. The cool thing about these spells is not only do you take the minion, you also steal whatever buffs they have on them. So you don't necessarily want to cast these right away. You generally want to wait for your opponents to do their buffing spells, and then you go ahead and steal their minions. You'll also notice it says when these can be played, flop ability phase, pre-flop ability phase. The abilities phase comes after the betting is complete. So seeing when they can be played also helps you plan out, how many bets you'll have to put in to get to the place where you can cast the spells. Next, we go on to some mid-game abilities. Some of my favorite and most players' favorites are the card and board changing abilities. Illusion is one that replaces the river with the top card of the deck. So if you get sucked out on and you get rivered, you can cast this spell and get a new river card. That's a wizard spell. The druids have one that changes the river and one that changes the turn as well. And then the necros have a pretty fun one called Time of Madness, where you burn the entire board and replace all 5 cards with new ones. So if you get into a coin flip and you lose that flip, but you happen to have your Time of Madness available, you can go ahead and cast that and see if the next board is more favorable for you than the first one was. Now, some examples of health recovering abilities are Holy Shield, regain 100% of health lost in a hand after losing at Showdown, and Bark Skin, which is when losing at Showdown, heal for 50% of the pot. So the 2 ways that the healing spells work, some are based on how much you've contributed to the pot, you get a percentage of that, and others are based on getting a percentage of the total pot size. So for the ones that are on the total pot size, you want to try to get into some multi-way pots. And for the ones that are based on the amount you contributed, it doesn't really matter. You can use them in any situation. These spells should be reserved for the biggest pots that you play, because those are the ones that you're going to want to do everything in your power to make sure that you win them. Now coming up to late game abilities, we have some examples of the debuffs. One is Flesh Wound, and it's all opponents receive bleeding for 9 hands. Another one is Venom Spray. Opponents get the poisoned debuff for 6 hands. Now, I kind of want to show you guys what all the debuffs look like. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Heroes of Holdem website. Go to the white paper, because all the information you need is in the white paper. I'm just going to go to the glossary, which has all the buffs, healing buffs, heal 5% of average health at the start of a hand. Shelter, which we're going to talk about. Sit out, don't pay blinds or antes. Gain the healing buff, safe from direct damage abilities, but not from debuffs. And then we'll look at some of the main debuffs that come into play. One is bleeding, which is 3% of health lost per hand. Another one is burning, 5% of health pool, which is your stack lost per hand. Then we have hexed, which is my favorite, 3% lost, and the player who casted it gets to leech that. So they lose 3% and you gain 3%. And the other big one is poison, 4% health pool damage per hand, but also you cannot heal, leech, or gain health from anything other than winning pots. So later in the video, when I cover the ways to get extra lives and stuff, poison blocks that. So very, very cool stuff here, and it's all available in the white paper. So yeah, Flesh Wound, bleeding for 9 hands, Venom Spray, poison for 6 hands. And there are ways that you can actually lengthen and shorten the length of these debuffs as well. Now the counters to debuffs are the removing debuff abilities. So one we have here is Herbal Remedies. Remove any debuffs on your hero. So even if you've gotten like bleeding and poison and double hexed, you could cast Herbal Remedies and they're all gone, just like that. Then there are the even better remove debuffs that not only clear your hero of the debuffs, they penalize other people with them. So the most powerful one belongs to the warrior. It's called Lift Curse. Remove all debuffs from yourself and minions you control and apply them to everyone else at your table. So let's say you got Venom sprayed and you're poisoned. You could cast this, and now instead of you being poisoned, every other player at the table becomes poisoned for that same length of time. So pretty cool stuff, and you start to see why it's important to plan out your abilities and not just remove a debuff as soon as someone puts a small one on you. You'd want to wait for a really tough debuff to be on you to cast your remove debuffs. And that's really getting the strategy of the game. Next, we have Bubble Time abilities, and these are the shelters, which I spoke about. Depending on the class, you sit out for a different length of time. The Necro has one called Feign Death, shelter for 9 hands or 3 at the final table. Find Shelter, I believe, is the Ranger, shelter for 6 hands, 3 at the final table. For the Druid, it's 4 hands and 3 at the final table. And while you're sitting out, not only do you not have to pay blinds or antes, you also heal for 5% of the health pool, the average health pool for each of those hands. So Feign Death, you cast this early, you know, if you're one of the short stacks, you're going to double up by the time you get out of the shelter. So these are really, really powerful, especially on the bubble of big field events. The times that I wouldn't always advocate using this on the bubble is if you have a big stack, if you're comfortable, if you're at a place where you want to actually, push people around on the bubble, you might save these. And these can also be really effective to use when you're at the very end game and you're four-handed or three-handed and the blinds get really big and stacks get really shallow, and you can skip having to pay those blinds and let the other players be forced to battle it out for a few hands, potentially getting you a pay jump or a ladder. There's also the free chip abilities examples. So Tithe is a really cool one from the Cleric. Force all players to call the big blind, gain an amount of health equal to the pot. This basically gets you 5 free big blinds because you put in one, everyone at the table puts in one, and then you get the size of the pot. So if you're at a 6-handed table, 6 blinds go in, and then you would get 6 blinds. You put in one, you get 6, net 5. The other free chips abilities are usually in the form of free straddles, tiger form, raise the big blind 300% without costing yourself health. There are lots of other ones that give you a free straddle, raise to 200% the big blind without costing yourself health, and sometimes give a debuff to people if they fold to it. So these are really useful and best saved for when the blinds are really big, because you'd way rather get a free straddle or a free 300% raise when the blinds are 10,000, 20,000 than you would when they're at 500 or 1,000. So these are typically saved for as late as possible in the game or on the bubble to apply a lot of pressure. And finally, we have some other helpful abilities. The first is the recovering abilities. That's a lot of abilities there. First one belongs to the wizard. Wheel of Fortune. Reactivate 2 target exhausted abilities. So you can take 2 abilities that you used previously in the event, cast this spell, and get them back. Extremely, extremely useful. Next, we have the one from the Druid Regrowth. Reactivate, it'll say random exhausted ability. So you can either get ones that let you choose what you get back, or you get a random one of the ones you've used. Now, something to note on these is it says in brackets they're brittle. That means that these abilities cannot be regenerated. Some abilities in the game are so strong that the devs don't feel it's fair for people to get to use them more than once during an event, and those will be marked as brittle, and your recovering abilities examples cannot be used to get the brittle abilities back. Something to keep in mind. Finally, we have counterspell abilities. These stop spells from being cast on you. You will get the option to use these after someone casts their spell. So counterspell, negate the effect of any ability that causes damage to you or gives you a debuff. You just say, no thanks. Reflexes, prevent any damage caused by an opponent's ability. So these are good things to have as a backup to protect yourself from some of the more damaging spells in the game. And you want to save them for, again, the most important critical situations. So that's pretty much everything about the abilities and spellcasting in the game. It's a very good intro. And as you play more Heroes of Holdem, you'll understand what I'm talking about, and things will really start to fall into place and click. So next, we're going to look at playing versus NPCs and minions, because in most of the different formats, you'll run up against some NPCs, which are computer heroes. And in all formats, you're going to play against a bunch of minions, and they play pretty similarly. They're not tough poker players. They're very easy to beat, and they're supposed to be farmed. They're meant to be farmed, so I'm going to give you the strategies to enable you to farm as many chips as possible from these softer competitions. So first are the things you need to know. If an NPC or a minion raise pre-flop, they will call almost anything. Very occasionally they will fold to your 3-bet, but I feel like their frequency for calling a 3-bet after raising is like 80%. If they raised, they're most of the time going to call a re-raise, regardless of what the size is. Next to know is that they play their hand strength post-flop and ignore bet size. So this allows you to be really flexible and really exploitative with your bet size, which I'll cover on the next slide. They do not understand pot odds or implied odds. They only understand their hand strength. They generally call if they have any draw, including gut shots, and fold if they have no piece of the board, even if you're betting extremely small. They don't increase pressure in later streets, but they do increase the pressure or kind of lower their standards for what they'll get all in with pre-flop as their stacks get shallower. So these guys get real degen-y. They're really willing to gamble if they have, 5 blinds or 3 blinds or, even 7 blinds. So know that they will call off pretty wide. And if you have the chips to afford it, or if you have the abilities to let you change the board, that enables you to get into some situations against them where you can play an all-in pot as a 60-40, 70-30 favorite, where if you have abilities, it's an even bigger favorite, and you can chip up very significantly because they won't put it in with trash, but they will call off with absolute trash, way more than you'd expect. So don't be afraid to go for value. They will occasionally find some bottom of the range bluffs, not very often, but sometimes they will make a raise with weak hands post flop, like the nut low. And I talk about the adjustment for that on the next slide. And while they cannot cast spells, they do have equipment. So it's important to click on the NPCs you're playing against to see what equipment they have, so you can know kind of what things they can do and what to be careful of. Like there's one piece of equipment that's a mirror that 25% of the time, if you cast a spell, you get hit with the damage. And I did that once with a poison spell, didn't realize an NPC had that, got hit with it, and suddenly I was poisoned, and it screwed me over for the rest of the game. So now let's talk about the best strategy for beating the NPCs. It's pretty basic, but it's good that you know it. So when value betting versus an NPC, if it's pre-flop and they've raised, you want to re-raise to 90-95% of their stack and then put the rest in post-flop. Granted, they'll usually call an all-in if they'll call 90% pre-flop, but if you make it 90%, they call and they miss the flop, they'll often just fold to the rest of the stack. They won't realize that they're priced in. So it basically gives you some extra fold equity. And instead of letting them see 5 cards to see if they hit and getting most of the stack, you can let them see 3 cards and have collected 90% of their stack if they fold to the rest of it. So that's how to go for max value pre-flop. And then post-flop, it's really just a matter of betting big when you have a hand. These players don't fold mid-pair. They don't fold bottom pair. Sometimes I've seen them even call with like undercards, although that's less often, regardless of the bet size. So if they have bottom pair, they're not going to fold for any bet. So if you have top pair, you might as well be betting pot or even over betting, because these players will call down. So you want to get max value against them by just betting big and not giving them the right price to chase their flush draw or straight draw or gut shot or 2 pair draw. Now, when it comes to bluffing, again, they don't really understand bet size. So you can get away with some really cheap bluffs. Pre-flop, you want to see flops with these players as often as you can. That might mean limping in. That might mean raising the minimum to get a little fold equity pre-flop, or defending versus their small raise. Almost always defending the big blind. Because if they have nothing, most of the time they'll fold to a bet, even if it's a min bet. So you can just call their min raise and then min bet 3 streets and have a decent amount of fold equity. They also often won't raise with anything but like the best hands. So you can price yourself in to go for a cheap draw by going min bet, min bet, min bet. And they might even just call you down instead of raising when they have like over pair aces. So as a bluff, I'm generally just min betting all 3 streets. But because every once in a while they find a bluff with the bottom of the range, I don't min bet with my medium strength hands. I bet with hands I'm comfortable playing for if they raise me, or having an easy fold if they raise me. But with my medium strength stuff, I generally try to keep the pot a little bit smaller and maybe wait till the river to go for my value, because I find that's the best way to extract it from these guys, since they'll call you with any pair, but they often won't bluff. So that's the basics of the strategy for playing versus the NPCs, and the same goes for playing against the minions in the events. If you implement these strategies, you're going to be getting way more chips than you otherwise would, and you will find you get tons of bluffing opportunities and tons of cheap turns and rivers by just implementing that min bet strategy. So next, we are going to cover the keys for short stack play. After the early game is done, most of the minions and NPCs have been busted, but the blinds are going up, and you are going to be getting shallower and shallower. So it's important to be prepared for that situation. So I grabbed some charts from pokercoaching.com, which you can join for free. I'll put a link in the video description. And this is some short stack play for 10 big blinds. So all tournaments in Heroes of Holdem are 6-handed. So what I did first on the left was I grabbed the opening range for first position at a six-handed table. And then for the image on the right, I grab the opening range for the button on a six-handed table. The red hands are the hands that are profitable to play. The grayed out hands are the ones that are unprofitable to play and should be folded. You'll notice that the chart on the left has a few less hands in red than the chart on the right. That's because when we're in early position and we have more players left to act behind us who could wake up with a hand, we want to play fewer hands. We want to play better hands that are more likely to be the best hand. And as we get in later position and there are fewer players left who can wake up with a hand, we can raise a wider range of hands. So the playable hands across the board are the suited aces, the pocket pairs, the suited nines, the strong offsuit broadways, so queen jack, king queen, and strong offsuit aces, ace seven and better. If we're on the button, we can play all aces, all pairs, all offsuit cards 10 and better, maybe even 9 and better, and any suited ace, suited king, and suited 7. So you can imagine that if you're in between early and late position, maybe you play suited 8s and the offsuit 10s, but not the offsuit 9s. You just kind of widen your range a little bit. These charts, if it's dark red, it means you should go all in with them. And if it's light pink, it means you should min raise them. But in Heroes of Holdem, it's going to be more specific, situational specific than that. Sometimes you're just going to want to push, go all in, and have the best chance to have everyone fold. Generally, the shallower you get, the fewer blinds you have, the more you want to do that, because picking up the blinds and antes is worth a lot more to you. And in the cases where you have like a really good hand, like aces or kings or queens, or you have some really good spells you can use post-flop where you don't really want your opponents to fold, you want to get some action, then you may go with a minimum raise. So I look at these charts in terms of what hands I can profitably play, but I don't rely on them in terms of how to play the hand, whether I should min raise or whether I should go all in. I use my intuition a bit more to determine how I should go about that. One final note on these charts is it's totally fine to play a little bit tighter than these charts suggest. There's nothing wrong with folding the suited nines or the small pairs or the ace 5 through ace 2 suited from early position if you want to play a little bit more snug and only get it in with stronger hands. I would not advocate playing looser than these charts suggest, though, unless it's the bubble and you have a really favorable situation going on. So you can take a screenshot, you can pause the video, you can write the notes down. These are very useful things to have for your short stack play. And we're going to go from this section, which is what to do when it's folded to you, to what to do when it's raised ahead of you. So next up, we have short stack play with 10 big blinds versus a raise. These are the charts for playing from the big blind. And on the left, we have what to do versus a minimum raise. And on the right, we have what to do versus an all in. Green means call, blue means fold, red means raise all in. So you can see that we're generally re-raising all in with our best hands. The ones on the bottom, the 5s, the 4s, the ace 5 to ace 2, ace 4, these are like to quote unquote balance your range, which is a concept we don't really need to use. There's nothing wrong with just folding these weaker hands and sticking to the red hands that are on the kind of top left portion of the grid. In terms of calling, we'll see it actually is quite a wide range. You know, anything suited, any 2 cards above an 8, pretty much anything connected, any ace. And the reason for this is because when we're facing a minimum raise and we're in the big blind, we're getting a very good price. We only have to put in 1 more big blind to play for a pot of 4 or 5 big blinds, depending on the antes. So when we're getting those odds, we can justify calling with a wide range to try to catch a nice flop, but we do need to play very cautiously post-flop. We don't just go nuts if we hit a pair after we defend with 8-4 suited or whatever. So same as the previous charts where I said, you know, if you don't want to play the weaker hands here, you can fold a lot of the weaker hands on these charts as well, and it's not going to be a detriment to your game. If you only played, you know, the suited 8s and the offsuit 10s and better, and ace 9 offsuit and better, and ace 6 suited and better, and some suited connectors, you'd probably be doing fine. This is just from a theory perspective, how wide you can go if you play as well as your opponent. And if you play better than them, you can go a little wider, but generally better to err on the side of caution until you really know what you're doing. Next, we have versus an all-in. And with this, we just pretty much call better hands than they jam with. So if we look at what they might jam with under the gun, we see it's suited nines, suited aces, king, jack, queen, jack offsuit. And we look here, we call with king, queen, suited tens, suited aces, and the better aces and better pairs. So we really just need to have better hands than they're going all in with. And this is against an optimal player. But if you have someone who's really loose, you could call a little looser. If you're playing against someone who you think is really tight, you could call a little tighter. These are just the default ranges, the shape of the ranges to give you an idea of what it looks like. But because the size of their raise matters, the position, the type of player matters, as well as how many abilities they have matter, you may play significantly tighter than this, and very occasionally you might play a little bit looser. But mostly it's these ranges or tighter, these ranges or tighter. And again, if you want even more ranges for all the different positions and all the different stack size, those are available at pokercoaching.com. Okay, next we're going to go to playing the bubble, because with your short stack play, you're going to make it to the bubble. You're going to make it to that opportunity to cash at a high frequency. And your short stack play is going to help you. But there are a few more things you need to consider to fine tune your play and be more precise on the bubble. So the key concepts for playing the bubble are that payout structure is everything. There are three main formats of tournaments in Heroes of Holdem. First, there are sit and goes, which typically pay 2 spots, first and second. Then there are small field MTTs, which usually pay 3, 4, 5, 6 people. And then you have the big field MTTs like the Horde, where, maybe 60 people or even 100 people are going to be paid. And the difference between a minimum payout and a first place payout is going to differ in ratios across those events. So in the sit and goes, where first is usually 1.5 times what second gets in terms of a reward, cashing is really important. Winning, not as much, because even if you get second and you min cash, you get 2/3 of what first gets anyway. In the small field MTTs, first is 2 to sometimes 4 times as much as a min cash, which is starting to get more significant, but not so much so that it's worth just going for the win and throwing cautious to the wind and risk bubbling. You generally want to play to cash than to win. In games like the Horde or games like the Say Championships, where there's a cash prize for top 3 and getting the top spots is worth way more than min cashing. In those cases, you can take a bit more chance. You can try to push people around on the bubble who want to cash and pick up some chips at that stage of the tournament, because going for first place is actually worth it in those ones. And if it means you bubble sometimes, that's not a big deal. Whereas in the small field ones, cashing is very important, and then playing to win. So in most cases, play to cash first, then play to win. And you want to avoid unnecessary confrontations. So how do we do that? Well, one thing is focusing on shoving and being the person going all in, or being the person putting the last bet in, more so than being the person calling all ins, whether it's pre-flop or post-flop. And that's because it gives you multiple ways to win. When you're the player moving all in, you can win A, if your opponent folds, B, if you get called and you end up having the best hand, or C, if you end up getting called and you don't make the best hand, but you use one of your spells to end up making the best hand. Whereas if you're just calling, you can only win with B and C, having the best hand by the river or casting a spell that helps you have the best hand by the river. So being the shover, being the person who's pushing, having the thing we call fold equity allows you to win more chips and more pots without showdown. And ideally, when you're on the bubble, where the next person out gets nothing, but the people who survive get paid and get rank and get all the good stuff, you want to try to win pots without showdown as often as possible. And that's done by taking the aggressive action, being the person shoving, being the person raising, being the person putting bets in when other people won't want to call. You want to be very wary of who has abilities left, because the people who have board changing abilities, card manipulating abilities will be more willing to call your all in because they have that extra backup. whereas players who have no abilities left will be more hesitant to call all-ins with anything but the best hands because they don't have any backup. So that means that when you have advantages, such as being a bigger stack than your opponents or having better abilities than your opponents, you can actually start shoving wider than these charts suggest, because your opponents are going to fold way more of these hands than they should be. And so that would be a time where you want to use your stack to push people around, try to pick up a lot of chips on the bubble because you know they want to cash. And that's going to be more effective as well in the big field tournaments, where players know that if they just fold, they can sneak into the money, which is very important. Then it is going to be in the small field tournaments where they're guaranteed nothing if they play passively. So that's some things to think about on the bubble. Generally, when you're short, you want to do what you can to try to cash, including using shelter, including using heals. But when you have the big stack and you have lots of abilities and you can start to push your opponents around, that's a good time to raise a lot of hands and try to accumulate a lot of chips. Okay, so we've gotten you past the bubble. Now we're going to go through some basics of heads up strategy. Fortunately, if you make it to heads up in any tournament, you will be guaranteed to be getting some tokens and to be getting some rank up, but it is more fun when you win. So let's look at some basics of heads up strategy. And for these, again, I just grabbed a couple of charts from pokercoaching.com. These are the 10 big blind charts for playing from the small blind. And on the next slide, we'll look at the big blind. So with these charts, red are the hands that are profitable to go all in with. Green are the hands that are profitable to call with. And in the second chart, green are the hands that are profitable to call an all in with. And blue are the hands that we would want to fold versus a big blind all in. So if we call and big blind goes all in with the hands they should, the chart on the right is what we would call they're all in with. So let's look at the chart quick. If for first act, we can go all in with any ace. We can go all in with almost any king for 10 big blinds. We can go all in with kind of most cards that have an 8 or better or a 9 or better. We can go all in with suited aces, suited kings, suited queens. And then we see again some of those balance hands, the suited connectors and suited gappers and the pairs. The main thing I want to focus on here is that there's nothing wrong with just taking the green hands in the top left corner and treating them as red and going all in. If you just want to jam with any ace, any king, queen 8 and better, any jack 9 and better, any suited Broadway, suited 9, suited 8, any pair, that's going to be totally fine. And it's going to be totally profitable. And that's often what I would do, to be honest. The idea with this calling strategy is you limp in with some of your best hands so that your opponent is forced to see a flop with like king 5 off when you have king jack, or 9-7 off when you have king 9, so you can kind of cooler them and trap them. Or that you can limp in with your best hands like aces or kings, so that if your opponent thinks you're weak and they try to raise you out, you can then put the rest of the chips in and trap them with your best hands. But generally keeping it simple and just jamming the best hands is going to be totally fine. And then we look at the chart on the right, which is a much cleaner and clearer chart. And it shows that if you limp in and get put all in for 10 big blinds, you can call with any suited ace, call with the better half of the aces, call with the better broadways, any pair in the suited broadways. And if you compare the two charts, it's kind of like on the left, you're shoving any ace, and on the right, you're calling with the top half of aces. So overall, you're going to have the best hand more often than not. They're going in with almost any king, you're calling with the best kings. Things like that. And if you just stick with playing the best hands, the Broadway hands, the two face cards, the strong aces, strong suited aces, and the pairs, you're generally going to do fine. So playable hands, heads up, pairs, aces, face cards, suited cards, and connected cards. If we had less than 10 big blinds, we would shove with more hands than this. If we have more, we would shove with less. You play looser as you get shallower and tighter as you get deeper. But do remember to consider abilities, because having those abilities allows you to push more aggressively. And if your opponent has abilities saved and you don't, you need to play a bit more cautiously. Same as the consideration on the bubble. And that's the power of having abilities behind. If you have an extra healing potion and an extra get 100% of health back lost from losing a pot, you can play very aggressively. Because if you win the pot, game over. And if you lose the pot, you can heal and get back in the game. So ability is very important to consider heads up and throughout the game. Something I want to reiterate. So next we'll look at heads up basic strategy from the big blind. And this one looks a bit more complicated, but I'll just really simplify it. The chart shows blue is fold, green is call, pink is raise small, red is raise all in. And this is assuming that the small blind limped with the green hands here. So limping with almost everything. They're playing almost every hand. And versus that, what do we want to do? Want to go all in with any ace, go all in with any king, go all in with the pairs. And then we have some of these weaker ones again that are like, for balance or whatever. If I were going to adjust this chart, I would say if they limp in, go all in with any ace, suited or unsuited. Go all in with any pair. Go all in with the better kings. And stay away from these suited twos and these offsuit queens and these low suited connectors. I would instead just check with those, go all in with most of the stuff in pink, and maybe raise small the very best stuff. The thinking behind this is some of these hands are profitable to go all in with, but with our very best ones, like aces and kings, we don't want to lose our customer, so we raise smaller, hoping our opponent will call. If you want to play a strategy that's just going all in when you're 10 blinds and shallower, totally fine, totally going to work. These strategies are based on raising your very best hands that flop well and trying to build a pot with them, and with the weaker ones, just pushing opponents out. If we're in the big blind and we got jammed on, well, strategy's pretty simple. Again, we look at what they're going all in with, and we just kind of call with the best of it. Aces, decent kings, suited aces, suited kings, pairs, and face cards. Even if, someone jams ace 2 and we call with jack 10 and we don't have the best hand, we're getting pot odds because we already have a blind out there and there's an ante. We have a decent percent chance to win, like kind of 60-40 kind of thing, maybe even 55-45. Plus, if you're saving your abilities, you might be able to cast some spells that, increase your chance of winning by 25, 50, 70% maybe. So general strategy is look at how wide they're going all in, call with the best hands. If someone's playing crazy, you can call more hands. If someone's playing really tight, then, maybe fold as much as half of these hands and just call with the suited aces, ace 8 plus, 5s plus, suited broadways, and maybe offsuit king jack, queen jack. These are the baselines. You can play tighter than this if you think you have a tight opponent, and you can play looser than this if you have a lot of spells working in your favor that you can use to help you win post flop. So in terms of playable hands, it's really the hands that have the right price versus the opener's range. If they raise the minimum, we can play way more hands than if they went all in. Same as we saw with the short stack play, right? Versus a min raise, we can play all these green hands. But if they raise 3 times the big blinds or 5 times the big blind, most of these hands are getting folded. So it largely depends on the raise size that you're facing, the type of player up against, and finally, how many abilities you have behind and how good they are. The better they are, the more loosely you can play because your abilities can make up for your cards. All right, that wraps up kind of the poker section. So finally, we're going to cover how to get extra lives, get extra health. Your health is your chip stack, so you can stay in the game longer and have better chances to cash, run deep, and get those wins. So first, we have the equipment for gaining extra lives. There are currently 4 of them in game. One is the healing potion. It's my favorite piece of equipment. I have it on literally every single hero that I own. When ending a hand under 25% of starting health pool, recover 25% of average health pools. So the deeper you are in the tournament, the larger this number is going to be. And it gets you back in the game. It won't give you the stack that you had most of the time, but it will give you a couple of big blinds that you could potentially spin back up and get in the game. So that one's based on average health pool. Smoke Bomb is based on the pot size. Ending a hand with 0 health, instead of being eliminated, you pickpocket, which is steal 5 to 20% of the pot. So if you get busted in a 100K pot and you get pickpocket, you can get anywhere from 5K to 20K back. It'll be randomized, and that's kind of your second chance staying in the game. whereas healing potion will always be 25% of whatever the average health pool is. A new piece of equipment that was added a couple of patches ago is Phoenix Ashes. When ending a hand with 0 health, heal for 55% of the average health pool, twice the effect of healing potion. However, you lose all your equipment. So, as I'll talk about in a future video, all the different types of equipment, most builds, you don't want to lose your equipment. Some builds, you're okay with it, but a 55% heal is pretty strong and is a very good second chance. So that's a cool one. And then finally, we have Sleep Potion, which isn't exactly an extra life thing, because if you have 0 health, Sleep Potion won't save you. You will die. But what it does, when ending a hand under 30% of average health pool, shelter and gain healing buff for 5 hands, 3 at the final table. So first you get the shelter. You don't have to post blinds or antes, but you're still in the game. And then you get the healing buff, which gives you 5% of the average health pool per hand. So you basically get 25% of the average health, same as the healing potion, and you don't have to post blinds and antes. Pretty powerful. So what I do on a lot of my characters is combine the healing potion and the sleep potion. I use 2 of my equipment slots to use these 2 items, so that if I get dusted, first I use my healing potion to get a quarter of the average health. Then I sit out for 3 to 5 hands if I'm on the final table or not, and get another 25% back. So I basically get the effect of Phoenix Ashes, but I don't have to lose my equipment, and I get to skip the blinds for 5 hands. So pretty useful stuff. And equipment, all equipment can be used by all heroes. The equipment is universal to all heroes, whereas the abilities are unique. So next up, we have some equipment that it won't necessarily save you in an all-in situation. It's not like getting an extra life, but it's a way to get extra chips while the game is running without having to win pots, without having to win chips with your cards. First one of my favorite, round of drinks for the boys. 20% chance to win 15% of any pot by 1 to the player your immediate left or right. So if the player on your left wins the pot for whatever, 200K, 20% of the time, you're going to steal 30K from that pot, even though you didn't play the hand. And you could be sitting there on 15K and steal a massive pot. This is extremely useful late game because the pots are very big. And once you get to the point you're playing 4-handed, well, look at that. One opponent is on your left, one is on your immediate right. So this thing is active more and more often as you get shorthanded. The pots are bigger as you get late game, and that 15% of the pot can be massive. So I'm a huge fan of this piece of equipment. Definitely an S tier piece of equipment, which I'll talk about in my future equipment ranking video. It's great stuff. Ankh necklace, 25% chance to collect 12% of any pot you go to the flop in. So 1 of every 4 hands that you see the flop in, you're going to get 10% of the pot back. It's nothing crazy, but it can kind of help you hang around a little bit longer in the game by getting these extra bits of health. Collection plate, 12% chance all players pay an ante to you pre-flop. Lockpick, same thing, 12% chance to steal all antes pre-flop. Dagger is pickpocket, same as we talked about smoke bomb. 10% of the time you get to steal 5 to 20% of the pot, I think. And then finally we have prayer beads, which is dependent on cards coming on the flop. Heal 8% of average health pool if there are 2 hearts on the flop. There's also one called Jeweler's Loop, where if 2 diamonds come on the flop, you steal 8% of the pot. So these can be combined to give you more ways to heal. And these are just some of the pieces of equipment that let you leech health from other players and from the pots directly, which adds another level of fun to the game. Next up, we're going to go through the abilities or spells specific to each class. And then we're going to wrap up. So for the clerics, we have 2 main ways to gain extra lives. The first one is Holy Shield. If you lose a pot, you can regain 100% of health lost in the hand after losing a showdown. So you get all in for chip lead, lose that, cast this, get your health back. Save this for a big hand. You only get to use it once, and it is extremely useful, extremely powerful. Next up, we have Lost in Prayer. This is the sheltering ability for the cleric. Shelter for 5 hands. Again, that's sit out, don't have to post the blinds, and heal for 5% of average health during those 5 hands. Also in the most recent patch, there is a new ability in the mix, which allows some classes to steal sheltering buffs from other players. So for cleric, it's called Divine Reclamation. So if someone was lost in prayer and you cast Divine Reclamation, they lose the shelter, you take it. I think you double the size of the heal, so you get 10% healing per hand, and you add a couple hands. So I'll mention which classes have those, even though I wasn't able to include them in the videos, but they add another level of fun and complexity and strategy to the game. So next up, we have the Druid, and all these characters on the right are some of the top level design characters. You can see just how cool the heroes look in Heroes of Holdem. So the Druid's healing ability is Barkskin. When losing at Showdown, heal for 50% of the pot lost in health. This is really good if you can get into a multi-way pot, because you get 50% of the entire pot. Not what you put in, like Holy Shield, what you lost in health, just the total pot size. So if you can get in a 4-way all-in and cast this, you double up. 6-way all-in, you triple up. Very, very, very powerful skill, one of the best in the game. Druids, to balance that, they have a shelter called Hibernate, but it's only for 4 hands, 3 at the final table, because the Druid has some stronger abilities than the Cleric, and this is one of the way that the developers balance the game by balancing the length of the shelter. Next, we have the Necromancer abilities for gaining extra lives. They have a shelter, Feign Death, same as the others, shelter for 9 hands or 3 at the final table. And then they have a couple of other things. So they don't have a lose a pot and heal ability per se, but they do have ones that let them steal health from opponents. First is Vampiric Touch. Target opponent takes 20% health pool. You leech half of that. So let's say you have 10K and chip leader's got 100K. Well, you could hit him with this. He loses 20K, you gain 10K back, and you doubled up. This is really good if you're way, way, way behind, or if you know you're going to be all in a hand. You can get all in, then cast this on the flop and steal some health, so that at the start of the next hand, even if you lose that all in, you're still in the game. So timing of this is important, but once you're all in, betting's closed, even if you gain extra health. So that's how you can kind of use Vampiric Touch as a way to keep you in the game. Next, we have Mass Hex, one of my favorite abilities in the game. All opponents gain Hex debuff for the next cycle. Hex means everyone loses 3% health per hand, for a cycle is 6 hands, and you gain all that health. So this just lets you steal a ton of health from your opponents, and if used properly is another one of the best spells in the whole game. It can't save you when you're all in, but it does let you build up your chip stack beforehand without having to play hands, so you can hopefully avoid having to go all in. All right, next we have Ranger abilities for gaining extra lives. We have the Decoy Trap, which was much like Holy Shield. If you lose a showdown, heal for 75% of your bets in the hand. And then the Shelter ability for Ranger is find shelter. Shelter for 6 hands, 3 at the final table. Ranger also has an ability called Fickle Nature, which allows it to steal shelter buffs from other players. And yeah, same thing. You double the health bonus and extend the amount of hands that you're sheltering for. But for it to work, someone else has to first cast a shelter. So sometimes you have and you don't get to use it. Next, we have the Thief abilities for gaining extra lives. First is Pilfer. If you lose at Showdown, heads up, steal 25% of the pot. So a good healing spell steals 25% of the total pot, not the amount of health that you lost, but it does have to be heads up. If you get to a multi-way pot and lose on the river, you won't be able to cast Pilfer here. Sleight of Hand. Target opponent takes 20% of their health pool and damage. You gain an equal amount. That's pretty much the same as Vampiric Touch. It's just for a little bit more. And then finally, we have Alibi. Heal for 50% of a pot you lose at Showdown. Redirect that damage to the nearest minion to you clockwise. So this one's good. In many ways, it's better than Pilfer because it's for twice as much. But the one condition is there has to be a minion for you to direct that damage to. If there are no minions on the table, you will not be able to cast this spell, and it will not be able to save you with an all-in. So the Thief has more contingencies and situationality required for their abilities to work, but they do have a few good ones in the mix. Next, we have the Warrior abilities for gaining extra lives. First one is Drinking Buddies. If an adjacent opponent wins this hand, leech 40% of the pot. Now, it may sound similar to the round of drinks with the boys I talked about earlier here. 20% chance to win 15% of the pot. But the difference is, first, that it's not 15%. You are getting 40% of the pot. And second, it's not 20% of the time it activates. If a player to your left or right wins, you can choose whether or not you want to cast this, and you can leech 40% of the pot in a hand you didn't even play in. So really powerful spell here. Next, we have one that is similar to Bark Skin and the other one we saw. Fully armored. When losing at Showdown, heal for 35% of the pot. So it's the same as Bark Skin, except it's 35% instead of 50%. So another good one to use in a multi-way pot, or just as a last chance if you lose a heads up pot that's really meaningful. You won't get your full stack back, but you'll get 2/3 of it back by using this. And then finally, you have Mercenary Contract. If you raise this hand previously, win 45% of the pot if you lose. This is really good if you get into an all-in situation, maybe a flip, and you don't know whether you're going to win or not. By casting Mercenary Contract, you either get your money back, which is 45% of the pot if you lose, or if you win, you get the full size of the pot. This would not activate if you win the pot, so you would just lose the spell, but it's still good to have as a backup for, those crucial all-in situations. And then finally, we have the wizard abilities for gaining extra lives. First, we have Arcane Medicine, which is like Holy Shield, just not for as much. When losing a showdown, recover 60% of the pot in health. Ooh, actually, I'd have to double check if it's of the pot size or of how much you put in. Sometimes the wording in the white paper is different than what's in the client. The client is what's most up to date and most accurate. So I feel like it's 60% of what you put into the pot, but maybe it's 60% of the pot. And then finally, we have Astral Projection, which is kind of like a free straddle thing, but a little bit better when it works. Leave your body, allowing you to automatically call any bets the entire hand without costing yourself health. So you post the blind for free. You have to use this under the gun. And then if people bet, even if they get to the point that they're all in, you will automatically match those bets. Even if you don't have enough chips in your stack to meet their bets, you'll still cover it because of the power of Astral Projection. So this is really good to use if you think a couple of people are going to play a big pot, or people are short and you think they're going to have to go all in, because it generates a ton of free chips. The downside to this is if people see you're casting it, they can just check down and you get the free blind pre-flop, but you won't get bets post-flop. Usually people don't catch that, but the more advanced players will, so that's something to consider with Astral Projection. But it is one of the great ways for Wizard to generate a lot of chips, which is a class that's... Wizard's more about board changing abilities, so this is the one that they have in the mix. And that's going to cover the abilities by class. That's going to cover pretty much anything and everything I had to share about Heroes of Holdem in this video. If you're interested in trying out Heroes of Holdem, you can go to gripst.com/heroes. And if you want more information about the game, feel free to join my Discord or post in the comments section of this video. So again, that's going to wrap up my extremely thorough strategy guide on Heroes of Holdem. I hope if you're an aspiring Heroes of Holdem player or someone who's just curious about the game in general, that this has armed you with a bunch of information to help you feel more confident and to help you feel like you can actually navigate the game more effectively. If you're wanting more information on Heroes of Holdem, you want more strategy before you jump into the game, I am working on some more videos, which will be linked in the video description and in the related videos once they're complete. I'm making some guides on how to play all the 7 pre-made characters that exist in Heroes of Holdem. I'm making a video ranking all the different abilities that the different classes have, and I'm making a video ranking all the different equipment in the game. So if you want the full encyclopedic understanding of everything there is to know about Heroes of Holdem, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel here at youtube.com/gripst, and I will give you all the Heroes of Holdem goodness you need to succeed and have more fun playing this awesome game that I am absolutely in love with. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments. If you have any questions about the game, throw them in the comments. If you have some experiences you want to share from using these tactics in the game, feel free to share them in the comments. I always love to hear from you guys. And until next time, you know what to do. Take what you learned, go out there and get stacking. Peace.